going through this huge stack of books that I wanted to read, and I did all of that. But then I thought, gosh, you know, there's so much in here that is so fascinating that there's an aspect of this that I don't know that has been treated properly yet. So hence that the book kind of was really kind of came out of that. And so the research that I looked to was probably, I guess, about 20 to 24 different books. And it was, as I mentioned, Roger Sperry's work already and his contribution. There were a couple other really noteworthy people. Michael Gazzaniga, tough name to say, followed Roger Sperry, and he did a lot of work on split brain research. And they looked to patients who had various illnesses, and as a way of solving that and giving them some ease from their a couple different specific kinds of illnesses, they actually cut the corpus callosum, which is the connector between the left and right hemisphere. And so then they were able to look at these patients discreetly and find out what was going on. And then Betty Edwards I mentioned, and then Dr. Lucia Capacchione did a book titled Recovery of Your Inner Child, which was very big in the psychological and the abuse community, helping people to basically go back in time and fix what was broken and may have been broken through the course of abuse. And it really was like the wires got disconnected, and the book helps people reconnect those wires to live a healthy, happy, kind of more normal life. So those books were sort of forerunners of what I looked at and my research. So what I discovered in the over 500 interviews that I conducted, a great number of which were one-on-one, probably at least over 250 were one-on-one, and then the rest were in groups of 5, 10, 20, 30, up to perhaps 100, were these four things about the what is actually occurring with hemispheric division, and then further how we can use it to our advantage. And that it's possible to unlock issues and aspects of our inner world that we otherwise may not know or discover. And then this whole notion, which has been, you know, just beaten to death in our world, and we're all challenged to think outside the box. You know, and even Del Taco has their commercial based on that. But we all talk a lot about that, but does anybody actually do it? You know, how do we think outside the box? We're all encouraged and admonished in these strategic planning sessions. And for those of you that are in the corporate world, you may know that the SWOT analysis is so common in every strategic thinking session. And I looked it up, and that has been around for 50 years and was invented at Stanford, and it stands for Strength, Weakness, Opportunity, Threat, where you analyze those four things as it applies to a product or a company to reinforce or understand or reinterpret the company's strategy. But you know, when you do that, as I have for over 30 times in 30 years in volunteer organizations and in my companies, it's, you know, it doesn't become so fresh anymore. And when you trot out the SWOT analysis and then say, we're going to think outside the box, you know, it's a disconnect. It does it. Everybody just goes, oh yeah, right, here we go again. So there's a different way of doing that, and then understanding more. Lastly, the obstacles, the barriers, and even as I phrased it, even in the book that I wrote. The lies, in fact, that we tell ourselves. So on the first one, the notion of hemispheric division, we know that does exist from the split brain research that was done. And one of the amazing studies that Michael Gazzaniga did was he had patients who had their corpus callosum cut and who had split brains and as such, and he put them in hundreds of them through a process where he tested them by just a simple experiment where he blinked a light. One was a red light and one was a green light, but he set this so that the let's call it the red light was blinking 75% of the time, but randomly. And then so he set them in front of this monitor, and then they guessed which light was going to come up next based on the pattern that they were observing over a period of time. And so the patients that had the corpus callosum cut actually observed this random but pattern where it was more predominantly red, and so they just said, you know, they marked down red every time, and they figured that they were going to be more right than wrong, and in fact they scored 75% of 75% because it was set to blink 75% of the time red. However, when he studied, surprisingly, when he studied the rest of us, the healthy, holistic-minded, smart people that are using all of our minds and thinking, wow, let's see what they do, how do you think we did? Not as well, exactly. And what happened is that we, using our whole mind, looked at that and we watched those lights blinking and we thought, I'm going to figure out this pattern. I know which one is coming next. And we tried to guess, and we did less than 50%. So we didn't observe the visual pattern and we didn't put it together. So there were cases like that where I thought, wow, that is really fascinating. So the idea here was that if we could activate the right hemisphere of our brain for specific functions to do specific things, we may be able to get a better result. So that's what intrigued me moving forward. So with that, is everybody ready? Because Nancy and Katie told me this is a group that is smart and likes to do rather than hear a long, boring speech. And I know when it starts to get boring, you know how, and this is something you can all take away into your classrooms. There's one really obvious clue when you know people are starting to get bored. And you know what it is? You can tell when people start to bleed from the ear. That's the clue. So here's what we're going to do. This exercise is titled Meet Your Animals. So what I'd like to do next is we're going to follow this process, and what we're doing is I'm going to ask you to write a question with your dominant hand. Just so you know, interestingly, 92% of the population is right-handed in the United States. And so whether that's your right or left, whichever hand you dominantly write with, you'll be writing the question, and then you'll be answering, and I'll be coaching you through this. You'll be answering the question first with your dominant hand, the same hand. And then what we'll do, as they say in Monty Python, and now for something completely different, then what you'll do is I'm going to ask you to switch hands. And just to get this out of the way right now, I'd like you to, with your non-dominant hand, I'd like you to write your name. So, because some of you may be thinking, gosh, I don't even know if I can write with my non-dominant hand. Simply about trying to get something to flow. Because all we're interested in doing is getting an answer on and getting the hand to work. Because what's going to happen is, unlike the process where we use our dominant hand, when we use our dominant hand, we write something, we know what we're doing, we're thinking about it, we write it down. What we're going to do with the non-dominant hand is basically the exact inverse of that process. And that's why it's titled Popcorn in the Brain. We're going to put the pen in our non-dominant hand, and we're going to have this sensation like something where it just happens, like almost magically. Your brain is going to be thinking about the question in a way that is where you're not engaging your brain, you're just there, and you're going to find that an answer just pops up. So it's going to be unlike anything maybe that you've ever in your entire life experienced before. It's most similar to that time when you're in the shower, you're taking a walk, something pops into your head, and you go, oh wow, that was a good idea. That's what this is like. It's that popping, that stroke of brilliance that you may get, the flash of brilliance that you may get. So and then we're going to end up using our non-dominant hand to answer the same question we posed with our dominant hand. So here is the question. Please write this down with your dominant hands. If I were an animal, what animal would I be? Okay, now for the fun part. Please switch hands and put the writing instrument in your non-dominant hand, whichever that may be, left or right, non-dominant. And I'm going to reread the question, and what I'd like you to do is perhaps just close your eyes, maybe let your mind go blank. Don't think about an answer. Allow an answer to just flow forth. And I know this is going to seem strange, but trust me, I've done it over 600 times. And only 5 or 6 haven't been able to do it. So I don't want to put any pressure on you, but only 5 or 6 have not been able to do this, okay? So what we're going to do here is I'll read the question, and you don't write until you feel moved to do so, and then you write whatever is there. You may see something, you may feel something, you may start writing not even knowing what you're writing, but don't judge yourself. Just allow it. There's a tendency as we get older to be perfect and to get all these things right. Just allow it to flow. Okay, ready? So here's the question. If I were an animal, what animal would I be? Boom. Let me share a little bit of my research findings, and then you can confirm whether you're in the main part of the test group, the 600 plus that I work with. I found that with most of my people that 90% of the time, when with the dominant hand, people wrote that they wanted to be a dog, a horse, a bird, a cat. How many does that apply to? Okay, now how can that be? This is a little bit, I don't have any answer to this necessarily, but I find it odd that with all of the animals out there, how can it be that 90% of us want to be the same 4 or 5 animals?
Few others.
We know them.
Okay, yes, and that is, I think, my hypothesis is exactly what you said there.
What she said.
That she said that we know them. So the answer, and remember what I said about the left brain? The left brain is interpreting us, who we are, what we do, interpreting our lives. And so my hypothesis further is that that first animal we write down is something that we aspire to be. We think, gee, wouldn't it be nice? Dog, boy, they have a great life. They sit around all day, they get petted, they get food, they go outside, they hunt, the horse is fun, they get to run around, birds fly around, they get to see everything, blah, blah, blah. So how many of you would say that my hypothesis is true, that if you would aspire to be, if you're going to be an animal, you'd aspire to be that animal? How many is that true for? Okay, most of you too. Okay. Now, but here's what happens. It's very different. It's very different when we switch to the non-dominant hand. Now, if you're like the 600 plus people that I've worked with, also almost 90% of you will have chosen a different animal than you wrote down with your dominant hand. How many wrote down not even a very, just a different animal? Okay, so how can that be? What other time in our lives does somebody say to you, we're at a restaurant or somewhere and somebody says, what's your favorite food? You don't say pasta and then go, no, watermelon. So how can this be that we're answering the same question with 2 different answers? Very unusual, right? And people have theories on that. Go ahead.
I think you preconditioned us, though.
Possibly.
I think you preconditioned us by when we studied, we would get different answers from when we start working with our non-dominant hand. And so, indeed, It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, so we did it.
And that's one theory that I have talked to with psychologists. That's a distinct possibility.
What happens if you start with the non-dominant hand first?
What does? No one's ever done that. So what happened with you? Most people are paying attention and following instructions. So, but that's good. So what did you get? This is how I learn, and as part of my research. So what did you get?
Oh, I followed directions, but...
Oh, you were just asking hypothetically. I don't know. It's a good thing. I'll have to try that. I'll have to reverse that. Yes, ma'am.
What about those of us that didn't? That chose something different than the 90%?
Okay, that you chose the same. No, 90% were saying that they had two different answers. You're saying you had the same answer?
I had the same answer, and also I didn't want to be a dog, cat, or mouse.
Okay, then you're really weird. No, I think that's great. Yeah, I think that's great, and I think that's what makes us human, because we all have different functions and different processes going on. Okay, I'm gonna keep going here because I don't want to get us bogged down too much in this because we have more to go. But what I will say about the left or the non-dominant hand, whichever it is, left or right, but non-dominant, is that my hypothesis here is where it really gets interesting, is that I've noticed that the non-dominant hand answer ends up being more of a representational answer for who we actually are in our lives.
Oh, that's scary.
So this is really a weird twist. So if you're here, some of you are here with your spouses. If you were to think about this or ask your spouse, am I more like the dog, or am I more that I wrote down with my dominant hand, or more like the porcupine that I wrote with my non-dominant hand? And the spouse will probably look over at you and go, hate to tell you, but it's the porcupine. So does anybody want to give me a for instance and volunteer what their answers were? Yes, sir.
Dog and then giraffe.
Dog and giraffe. Good. Now, just to have a little